All right, Dr. Jess, well, welcome to the Unfiltered Healing Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
we're honored to have you on today. You're such a huge contributor to our topic today and really a trailblazer for many in the medical field to find root causes and education to help support many to not rely on those broken medical systems. You have so much knowledge that goes even way beyond the topic that we're talking about today. But for many that might not be super familiar with you, would you mind just giving a quick intro about yourself and how you were specifically led into our topic today of biotoxins and environmental illnesses?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I am a conventionally trained medical doctor who, I'm originally from West Virginia. I went to school in Louisville, Kentucky. So I am a sort of a small town mentality and didn't know anything about root cause medicine or natural medicine or any of that when I first applied to medical school. That's all I thought there was, conventional medicine. And really got taken for a ride during medical school, believed everything they taught me, everything hook, line, and sinker for me. And I got my flu shot every year, and I drank the Kool-Aid and ate the cafeteria food and all the things that regular doctors do. And I was a board certified internal medicine hospitalist for almost 7 years before I really had trouble staying in the system just because I saw cracks in it. I saw people being discharged on way too many medications. I saw through the food pyramid and the things they were feeding the sick patients in the hospital. So I started to be disruptive, and they didn't like that so much. So I ended up quitting that type of medicine and getting trained in functional medicine and really, I guess, suffering for a few years trying to find my way and figure out how to make money and all that stuff and still feel competent. And, went through Gerson, got trained in Ozone, got trained in an Institute of Functional Medicine, and now will be training in bioregulatory medicine. So I feel like I'm a lifelong learner. I always want to learn more about my patients. I always want to believe them. And the way I got into mold was that my fiance, Jason, ended up having it. And he was really sick when we first got together, and we couldn't figure out what was wrong. And it turns out it was mold from living at the beach in a bunch of water damaged homes at the beach. And on top of that, never just mold, there's other things involved, right? So it sort of took me on a journey not a lot of doctors get to see, where you're not only learning about mold, but you're also living with someone who's suffering from mold. So you see all the idiosyncrasies that I don't think a lot of other doctors would get to see.
Yeah, that must have been like a huge step of faith for you too, coming out of the comforts of like just that medical system, even just payment wise, consistent paycheck. And then you said just jumping out into your own. What was that process for you?
Yeah, that was really hard because once I quit, I just sort of jumped and said, "Oh, I'm quitting." And I moved from Portland, Oregon at the time down to California and lived with my best friend for about 6 months and drove about an hour one way, 45 minutes the other 2 days of the week, 3 days, an hour, 2 days, 45 minutes one way to shadow a naturopathic doctor and then work at Whitaker Wellness under Dr. Julian Whitaker, which did a lot of root cause functional medicine and where I learned a lot about herbs. And so it was, but I wasn't making any money, obviously shadowing the naturopathic doctor. It was a, volunteer gig. And we got paid a little bit more, right? Eventually when I got hired on and figured out what I was doing. And then, I really was spending hours a day one-on-one with patients, not kind of learning with them. Because, at that time I thought, Hashimoto's was a root cause, right? I didn't understand that there may be a deeper answer that people need to look into, right? So I was sort of learning with my patients. What was different about me was that I believed them. I didn't say, "Oh, you're making that up," or "That's psychosomatic," just because I didn't have the answer.
Yeah. And that's oftentimes what can happen from the other side.
Yeah. So I was very
Yeah.
poor, and I was very broke, and I was very lost during that time of my life. Yeah.
But you found your way and you worked through it and you pushed hard. And, you're seeing the fruits of that labor now and just the huge increase in people you're helping. So, hopefully that encourages maybe some Western docs to, it's not hard to break out of that system. It's uncomfortable, but
Yeah,
it's so worth it for sure.
I agree. It's very uncomfortable, right? And some people aren't okay with discomfort, I guess, right? So,
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Okay, so going back to mold here and our questions, I think it's important to mention first, as you already know, that mold is a part of our natural ecology. So we don't, want to eradicate fungus completely. It's not our enemy, and it's everywhere. But there are also different types that are pathogenic and that are toxic. It was actually interesting when I was researching for my book. I learned that mycotoxins have been used as weapons in the past. And in the 70s, when Russia attacked, what was it, Southeast Asia, and with yellow rain, which is mycotoxins, um, that mycotoxins have a higher toxicity than even nerve gas. And so that was new information to me. So these pathogenic types can actually really have some detrimental effects. So where is the pathogenic mold typically found? Because it's very evasive and most of the time you can't really see or smell it. So where are those, bad guys found?
so, you can find amounts of mold in moldy food. Obviously, if you guys leave your leftovers in the fridge too long, you'll see some mold maybe growing on it. But there can be minute amounts of mold on produce, on certain types of grains, all that stuff. But really, unless people are already sick with mold, the food isn't a huge exposure for most people. Most of the time, people get an exposure from water damaged homes, schools, workplaces, homes in general. And inside the homes, it's not always just blatant. It's not, on the ceiling. Not always. You're lucky if you can see it, honestly, because really,
Hmm.
most of the time it's hidden. Like you said, there is only a small portion of people that can really smell it or react as soon as they walk into a home. Most people, like me, I don't even know if it's like on the wall most of the time, right? So but it's bad for all of us. It'll get all of us over time. And so usually if it's not right on the walls, it's behind the walls. It's, underneath sinks. It's if windows are not sealed properly, it's in basements. It's in bathrooms that aren't vented properly, or if things are vented to the attic, that can be a problem. So it's in all these hidden crevices and places because people can do aesthetic things to hide it a lot of times for a while. Or, the water damage gets inside where the pipes are, and it's very hidden in the way we build homes. So it's not always obvious. Even if it's a new
Hmm.
home, you would never think that there's mold. And sometimes it's the way the home is built. So,
Well, isn't like the underlying cause mostly moisture,
correct.
right?
Rising
So
damp in all those places, right?
yeah, because you could even have it like maybe in carpet or just something where there's moisture even underneath.
Think about if
Just
you ever left the windows down in your car, right? And
Mhm.
it rained. Um, there's
It gets
carpet,
messy.
right?
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, it gets messy. So how long does it take for mold to typically start forming when there is like that moisture or leaking?
The quickest I've seen in the studies is 24 to 48 hours with, I believe, gliotoxin, which is a certain type of mold. And that's a relatively quick time under a kind of ideal conditions for mold. Unfortunately, mold likes about the same temperature that humans like to live in too. And so, really, you're thinking about the first few weeks after the water damage. If some water damage seeped into the below the floorboards where anything is porous, it really is going to kind of fester and simmer down there for the next couple weeks. And then you might start to slowly see, insidiously see problems over the next few months or symptoms in sensitive individuals in the household.
Yeah, so it's really important to get it taken care of even the first day because that's very fast.
It is.
24
It
to
is.
48 hours is not a long period of time.
It is. I mean, I have an example. I had a patient who was really sick with autoimmunity and everything. And the first time I met with them, they didn't remember the leak in their house when they first got married. And it had been 25 years. And so Basically there had been the water heater had ruptured and it had flooded the whole first floor of the house, and he had gone and cleaned it all up immediately. But what do you do about the stuff that seeps below your reach, right? And so all
Mhm.
that was moldy underneath their floorboards, and that was right when her autoimmune symptoms had began, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's so elusive. I heard it can also like hide in dust too, right? So most people like will say, "Oh, I just have like a dusty home or dusty," so it can do that as well, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's sort of like the way it behaves, it forms this hyphae and spores. And it's almost like, those dandelions you touch and they blow everywhere, the little white ones. It's sort of like
Hmm.
that when you touch them. They kind of like, right, and go all over with the spores and hyphae. And it's not good because these are things that can be absorbed in the skin, be breathed through the nasal passages to the brain and the lungs, or it can be eaten even. So there's many different ways that this can get inside of us, right? And it's so small we wouldn't know.
Yeah, yeah, I've had that. People say that so many times, like, "Oh, my house is just dusty." I'm like, no."
What I think about? I think about that Bible verse that says cleanliness is next to godliness. And I
Yes.
wonder, there's also scripture in the Bible in Leviticus about a house full of mildew should be desecrated. So, yeah, I agree, Bible.
Yes. Yes, all the keys are in there.
Yes.
So what are some like so you mentioned a couple gliotoxin. What are some other common types of mold found in homes?
For sure. So some of them, maybe some astute listeners or people who are really into health may have heard of. So I would say the two most infamous ones are probably aspergillus and ochratoxin. People have heard of
Hmm.
penicillin, which makes ochratoxin. So penicillin, stachyboitres, aspergillus are three of the biggest ones. Stachyboitres, it's a hard word to say, and most people haven't heard of that one, but that is the toxic black mold. It's like the typical toxic
Hmm.
black mold that you see. Um,
And that one's typically more severe, correct?
it is. It's
Yeah.
really, really aggressive and very damaging to people in general, their organs, their cellular um, mitochondria as well.
Do some of the different species kind of attack, like you said, the black mold attacks certain things? Do some of the other species attack different areas as well, or does it just kind of depend on the person?
No, absolutely it does. There are definitely published studies like PubMed studies about how aflatoxin is linked to hepatocellular cancer and liver failure. There's studies on ochratoxin and how it's linked to renal cancer and chronic kidney disease, especially ochratoxin and glyphosate together. So yeah, we see certain things like zearalenone or ochratoxin that I've mentioned previously are known endocrine disruptors. So, in the animal studies and even in the human studies, we see how they cause hyperestrogenic or estrogen dominant syndromes in pigs and cows. And I mean, I'm talking about like the mothers that were pregnant ate moldy maize that had zearalenone in it. The pigs were born with bigger genitals and things like
Mm.
that. So it's showing you in the studies how much this certain mycotoxin or mold spore can actually mimic estrogen because it's so close in the estrogenic structure.
Yeah. Wow, that's super fascinating. We'll get to the hormone stuff in just a second.
Sure.
Um, Other than the mold species, there's also the problem sometimes in homes of bacteria as well, which um, I think not a lot of people know when they do, home testing. So can you kind of dig into what some of those could be as well?
Yeah, for sure. So the bacteria are crazy, actually. You're right. I feel like a lot of mold testing companies don't should fully test gram positive and gram negative bacteria because both of those can be a problem. So the kind of thing that's all the new rage that Dr. Shoemaker is talking about right now is actinomycetes. And actinomycetes is this really strange gram positive bacteria that kind of behaves like a fungus too and makes spores. And it's actually even more prevalent than mold in water damaged homes. I mean, it's like almost all of the homes found that had any water damage had actinomycetes. Um,
Mm.
Besides that, though, there's a lot of gram-negative bacteria that can be a problem. And they have something called lipopolysaccharide in their cell wall, and they produce something called endotoxins because of that. And so these endotoxins are byproducts that are really damaging to the human body and can cause some end organ damage, and really cause some pretty nasty symptoms for us because they're literally a toxin to us. And so it's really important if you're getting your home tested to check out a company like Environmentalist, who I really like, who does actino testing, who does gram-negative bacteria endotoxin testing, and mold testing.
Yeah, you segued well into my next question, which was what are adequate testings for your home?
Look at that. Look at that.
Perfect.
So, I will say this. I really like Envirobiomics. It's a stupid name, but I love them because they're very thorough with their testing. I love Real Time Labs, wonderful testing company as well. And it's always important to kind of match up what you find in your home with what you think is going on inside your body too. Because you think
Mhm.
you're in a water damaged home, you want to make sure that you're finding the same species of bacteria or mold or whatnot in your body and in your home.
Yeah, and it's also important to mention that because some of the inspection companies don't really test all of those things, people can get like a false sense of security. So, for instance, we're talking to a patient and they're like, no, I've already had my home tested and we were in the clear. And so then we have to go into, well, who did your mold testing and what did they do?
Absolutely.
Because now people are like, no, I'm totally clear, and then they actually really do have a mold problem. So that's why it's really key um,
You're right.
to get some of those other things.
You're right. There's a I should mention that people should do ERMI testing, Environmental Relative Moldy Index, and that's a test developed by the EPA or Environmental Protection Agency. There's a lot of companies and like you said, like HOAs or not HOAs, but like apartment companies that own apartment complexes that will get the wrong type of testing. And like we as docs, like you said, have to go back and do our own sort of investigative work to see if it's a legitimate test that we can trust or not.
Yeah, and the ERMI test is one that, you don't need necessarily like a doctor or specialist to order. People can just order on their own, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know for you, when you moved and you were looking for homes, like you made a point to go through some of those inspections, maybe even not with a specialist, and do the ERMI testing. So, how much would you recommend that to people, maybe even like first time home buyers or whatever they're doing, and to not, feel like you're being anal, but to feel like you're paying a lot for that home, so you want to make sure that there's not mold
Oh,
problems.
absolutely. Absolutely. I would say, I wish everyone would do that. The only issue that I've heard from feedback from people is the market is so hot right now that they're like losing, it's basically rentals, right? If you are looking to rent, you have to like
Yeah.
sign quickly or you're going to lose it, right? And so for those people, I would say take a moisture reader with you. It's
Mm.
probably like 50, $60 on Amazon. You can just kind of put it on the wall and it'll tell you the moisture level. And that's the next, it's not as good as an ERMI test, but it's the next best thing, right? Especially if you're in a hurry. And really kind of, I tell them too, you can be in there like 20, 25 minutes if you dilly dally. So take your time and
Mhm.
check in, go inside. And how do you feel if you're sensitive? You know?
Yeah. Yeah, and you can kinda look sometimes on, like, even the outside of the building or things like that too, right?
Yes.
You can see areas where there's been damage, and
Yes.
you can ask questions.
Yeah, it's good. That's great
Yeah.
advice, actually. Really looking at the foundation, at the ceiling, getting in the attic or basement if you can, just to kind of feel around and see how you feel in different areas. You
Mhm.
can swap things while you're in there and send it for an ERMI test, but sometimes it takes a couple weeks to come back. So yeah.
Yeah, and what are because I know you've talked about this before too, like, as far as even building materials or just, like, the way modern homes are built.
Yes.
Um, how do people, kind of wrap their heads around that? And then maybe, tips for how to avoid some of those things.
Yeah, so it is a shame. I do think that the problem with most people being sick today, because mold's always been around. You mentioned in the beginning of this podcast, it's part of our natural ecosystem. And that's exactly
Mm-hmm.
right. Like why people say mold's everywhere, you can't get rid of mold. Well, it's everywhere. That why is it in modern housing worse than what it should be? That's because of our building techniques. And what we're doing is we're doing things like using particle board, which should never get wet, using drywall, which contains a high amount of cellulose that feeds black toxic mold stachyboitres, right? So there's these certain things we're using, like toxic adhesive, toxic paints, carpet. When these toxins get damaged, they attract mold for organic cleanup. Of it, that's what it does. It digests organic waste. It gets rid of bacteria. That's how mold was even discovered, or was stopping bacteria in a petri dish. So that's it's part of a natural ecosystem. And if your home gets damaged, has toxic building materials, or people shortcutted things and use cheap materials, it is going to be a problem if there's water damage. On top of that, we're doing something called energy efficiency now, which usually means airtight homes with little airflow going through them, which is great for energy efficiency. It's horrible for mold growth. That's not how nature intended. So,
Yeah. And I think it's probably pretty hard in a lot of those like super hot, humid states that they can't really allow too much airflow because it's so hot. And so they have AC running all the time, or, those can even get moldy in the air vents. So,
yeah, it's so true. And then how many times do people look in their HVAC? Like, never. No one looks in their HVAC.
mhm.
No one looks in their vents hardly. Kudos to you guys if you do this. But me, when I rented places, I didn't do that, ever. And so just looking in there, just really educating yourself about, if boards are kind of bent and curved, and they kind of feel weird when you walk on them, that's a sign of sometimes underlying water damage, right? If the ceiling or walls look different colors, or things have been caulked in a certain way and repaired, these are things to pay attention to. If the foundation is
Mhm.
off or crooked, that's usually things like water damage that we just don't pay attention to.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Interesting. All right.
Yeah.
Well, I already know this answer and you already know this answer, but for people that don't know, can someone really heal living in a moldy home?
Yes. I say this out of experience. And this is where it comes down to your other traumas, exposures, everything that might be in your toxin bucket on top of that, right? That can get on top of the immune system. The other thing that counts are your genes. You know, they're
Hmm.
not everything, but they're something. They do matter for
Hmm.
some things. And what we found through some of the research is that there's a genotype called HLA-DR, and they don't recognize Lyme proteins or mold spores. The body just doesn't recognize them once it enters the body, as well as other people. And so they have trouble getting rid of these things once they're inside their body. So those people have a lot of trouble healing if they're in a water damaged home. It's like their drainage pathways will not open up for them or something. Um, I would say that if you don't have any of those alleles or genes or that genotype, it is possible, especially if there's not a lot of trauma, or anything stresses you're going through right then, especially if you're sort of a healthy constitution in general, right? You started a good
Hmm.
starting point, then yeah, I mean, honestly, this just happened to me. I have a friend living at the beach in Long Beach who wipes mold off her walls and then bleaches them, and I had to tell her to stop, and is so sick. And 2 days of being on the right supplementation and sweating and doing enemas, and she feels amazing. And so I can almost guarantee you that she doesn't have HLA-DR because of her rebound and bounce back.
Yeah, and that genome as well, doesn't it also create types of like hypersensitive? So not only can they not get rid of it effectively, but these are also your individuals that like I mean, I kind of call them like my super smellers,
Yeah.
where they're like, they can smell it like within an instant or like feel it within a couple minutes. And they're like, oh, no, there's mold in here. Can't do it. And I'm like, well, it's kind of a superpower, but also it's
It's a
kind of
double-edged sword, right? Yeah.
totally.
Yeah,
Um,
these are people that out in evolutionary times in the community, they would be like, don't drink that water.
yeah,
For your genotype, you're not going to feel it. That thing almost killed me. Don't go in there. There's mold. They are the ones who protected the community
yeah.
at large because they were so sensitive they could warn other people.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it can be a challenge for those people if they're in that moldy environment too.
Oh, it
You know,
almost
those
kills them.
because they're just like, yeah, and then they react to everything, and then you don't really know what's causing what.
You're literally like, you can't have water. Water causes hives. Like, it's literally that bad for some of these people, you guys. Like, they can't even breathe or move. Some of them are bedbound because of living in a water damaged home. And then, let's say, getting bit by a tick. And it's like these exposures pile up and their immune system cannot recover.
Yeah, that's a big one I test in my practice a lot too, is the HLA, the genome. But those are also, the people that you'll find like they react to like they're like so strictly eliminating in their diet and they're eating like three things. And you're like, how are you living eating all three foods? They're like, this is the only thing that doesn't make me react.
They're like green
And
beans,
so,
rice, and chicken every day, all 3 meals.
yeah, totally.
Mhm. Yep.
And so it's heartbreaking, but it's also, that's why we do these types of talks, because it's like, hey, there's some answers here. You just got to figure out where those weaknesses are and then begin to eliminate those things out. So we didn't want to not do this podcast and talk about that too, because that can be a huge limiting factor for people healing from mold. Um,
Yes.
you kind of already touched on this a little bit, but despite someone actually like leaving a moldy environment, there is also that internal process, right, of producing mold internally, and with mycotoxins. So, can you explain kind of the internal process that happens even after you may leave that environment as well?
So it's almost like, and this again is really the HLA-DR type of people, or it's people who maybe don't have a bunch of alleles, maybe they have one or none, but they lived in a moldy house for so many years that you finally get to everybody, right? And so it's almost like the mold spores are they are lipophilic. They love things like the brain, the adipose tissue, the bile, anything where fats are. And so in these people, their body just doesn't recognize the problem. So even after they leave the moldy home, they literally cannot rid themselves of mycotoxin and mold spores. And it's almost like these things settle in the tissues and in the fluids. And it's sort of like, as a practitioner, you have to go and kick the dust up at the construction site, if you will. Which means pull things from the tissues, which can mean these people really reel from it. And you have to be very cautious with them. So, what we're saying is, even sometimes months or years later, if you're really a resistant person that can't get rid of mold spores, you may still be reeling and have this problem in your body and not be able to heal because your immune system's haywire and can't get back on top of it because the mold spores are still present within the body. Um, I think that's what
Mm-hmm.
you're asking, correct?
Yeah, and does our body kind of internally, so say regardless of, without that genetic variation there, does the body kind of naturally deal with a lot of those endotoxins, or irregardless of that, it still needs support to do that?
Yeah, so that really depends on your genes and other exposures. But for some people, I can just put them on a binder and get them sweating after they've been out and they're good. For other people, it
Hmm.
is a full total body immune system overhaul. I know you know what I'm talking about, Dr. Rachel. So they definitely
Hmm.
need supportive care. Sometimes even a year or years after they're out of the moldy home because they have so many different frenemies or pathogens, toxins in their toxin bucket.
Totally. Yeah. And so you've touched on a little bit of hormones, you've touched on how they like fat specific tissue in the body. What are some other ways that we maybe haven't hit on that mold can also affect the body?
Yeah, absolutely. So I tell people all the time, mold is sort of like, everyone's heard of a cytokine storm now. Mold is sort of the OG of cytokine storm starters, if you will. And what that means is it creates this haywire, imbalanced immune response where one side of the immune system is underreactive and the other one is overreactive. And eventually, the whole immune system unravels if this exposure continues, especially in sensitive individuals. And what that leads to so many different things. It's sort of a catch-all when the immune system is haywire. Like, if your immune system's haywire, you can protect against some things and then not other things, right? So we see people who have mold or sort of sitting ducks for exposures like parasites or Lyme, right? Those two often go hand in hand because of that imbalanced immune system starting from mold. So I often will screen or test or treat or all of it for Lyme and parasites with mold because I see that so much. The other thing it can do, because of it being a catch-all with the immune system out of balance, is it can make viruses worse. It can really, like I linked to cancer, it is a strong link to a lot of autoimmune conditions. People who have Graves' disease or autoimmune hyperthyroid are often also HLA-DR, the genotype we discussed. It's also linked to sarcoidosis, right? It's linked to Hashimoto's as well, lupus. So there's a lot of different labels that we use, especially autoimmune conditions, that people need to dig deeper because there are links to mold with that. And, it really chips away at our mitochondria, our little energy makers. And there's so many chronic diseases linked to mitochondrial dysfunction. So yeah, I don't think we've even really scratched the surface with there being over 300 different mycotoxins. We've really just scratched the surface as to how much people's homes might be making them ill.
Oh yeah, I'm pretty sure you can correlate every single dysfunction with mitochondrial damage. It's just we're inundated now,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. And
definitely mold.
that makes sense. So if you guys don't understand, it's because mitochondria are in every single cell but red blood cells. So the cells that make up the organs aren't functioning properly. So that's linked to everything, right?
Totally. Yeah. And as well as you mentioned, like attaching to the fat in the brain, what are some like symptoms specifically for that as well? Because it's
Yes.
linked to like, decreased dopamine and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Because some people kind of feel like crazy with it. So, how would you describe symptoms that
Yeah.
people express?
I really appreciate Dr. Dell Bresidon's research. So he came out with some research that linked type 3 Alzheimer's to mold illness. And that's breathing in the mold spores, right, that go right in the cranial cavity. We see a lot of vagus nerve dysfunction with it, palpitations, a lot of linked neurodegenerative conditions, right? Parkinson's, possibly Alzheimer's, type 3, as I mentioned, even ALS has a connection too. And you have to think, if you have something right here in your sinus cavities that you're breathing in the high spores with damaged mitochondria, that makes sense, right? And we actually have articles that have been published. One I think William K. Reed did about mycotoxins causing ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease. So yeah, that's 1,000%. I mean, I'll have young people come to me in their 30s and 40s and say, they literally all say the same thing. They say, I feel like I'm getting Alzheimer's.
Yeah. Yeah. Location. Sinuses in the brain. It's like a straight route up, so it can cause anything in the brain to be dysfunctional there.
Yeah. And
But
really,
people love it. It's crazy.
people complain of things like brain fog, fatigue, brain fog, not thinking clearly, name calling, recall problems. So if that's you guys, don't forget to look into mold.
Yes, huge factor there. I think there's lots of research with mold and like brain cancer as well, because again, location. So, anything that may be affecting the brain, look into airway and sinuses and things that could be affecting it there. Um, Another thing that can be tied into this as well is the topic of candida, which is a natural part of our ecosystem. But then you have people that have chronic candida overgrowth all the time. And, I've heard you as well as other practitioners talk about how just attacking the candida is not the way to go. And oftentimes, other than, heavy metals and other things like that, oftentimes there is just an underlying of this pathogenic fungus or mold. So, can you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, we call candida opportunistic. I've often called it mold's dirty little cousin, because they run so close together. Because mold, again, suppresses the immune system so much that it lets something like candida grow. But, recently I've started to come into the idea that possibly they're digesting something too, right? I know I had a candida infection because of glyphosate in my body. So,
Mm-hmm.
you don't want to eradicate something right away. You want to find out what the root cause is. So if your immune system is haywire, being suppressed by a big gun like mold or Lyme or parasites or whatever you're dealing with, then candida will overgrow there because you've wiped out your good guys, or there's something there to digest. So sort of look into mold, and then look deeper to see maybe into a total tox burden or something, to see if there's a toxin there that might be causing the problem too.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, in your experience, what are some like additional diagnosis or conditions, and you've maybe gone through all of these already, that you've seen correlate with maybe not just mold, but also like biotoxin illness? Because you mentioned, like Lyme and other types of things are really common with mycotoxins. Are there any that we've kind of missed in that list that you would also want to highlight?
Let's see. Yeah, fibromyalgia is a condition linked to mold, chronic fatigue syndrome. These are all just like labels of a constellation of symptoms, right? Mast cell activation, multiple chemical sensitivity, all of these are definitely linked to mold. Um, in fact, there was, I think, a study done that showed that people with chronic fatigue had at least one urinary mycotoxin. 93% of them had one urinary mycotoxin in
Mm,
their urine, right? And so that is, I need to see symptomatology too, but that is very compelling evidence for me, because it makes sense in the science as to why these people would be chronically fatigued. And it makes sense to me that their body is appropriately reacting. The mast cells are freaking out and appropriately releasing histamine because they see something in the body that doesn't belong there that needs to be killed off. Right.
mm-hmm. And lots of hormone dysregulation, correct?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Depending on, not all mold spores are hormone disruptors, but there are a couple that we know of anyway at this point that are just potent hormone disruptors. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Have you ever seen, I've seen this in a few patients, but I've seen like super, super high cholesterol levels as well. So
Oh,
is that like the process of, the affiliation to fat, or just maybe the toxic burden of it on the liver?
yeah, absolutely. Because our cholesterol is made from bile acids and bile salts, right, that are returned through enterohepatic circulation. So, if you've got something in the lipophilic in the bile, a toxin like a mycotoxin, then for sure it's going to clog up the process of the genesis of cholesterol, which comes from bile recirculation, right? And in general, the liver makes the bile, right? It's very
Hmm.
lipophilic organ as well. The gallbladder stores it. So there's all these caniculi, canals, and different ducts that connect the entire system together. So it's sort of like if that's in the bile, it's going everywhere throughout your biliary tree. And yeah, I've definitely seen high cholesterol connected to parasites and mold. It's almost like the pathways become malfunctioned a little bit, and the whole synthesis of the enzymes and the production of making that cholesterol goes haywire, and then you start to see it in the sex hormones which come from the cholesterol.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And then you have so many people that then just get their gallbladder removed. And so then that complicates everything. And I don't remember who I read. It'll probably come to me later, but it was a practitioner that said like most gallbladder issues are, some overgrowth of candida or like fungal mold based. I was like, well, that makes perfect sense because of just the mechanisms. So how many of those people actually just need to like clean out, their moldy livers?
It's so true. I can't even, I mean, I fixed my dad's high cholesterol and diabetes issues with candida and parasite cleansing because they were causing cravings for things you probably shouldn't have been eating as a diabetic. And then, when you have something like parasites or something super inflammatory or inflammation producing in a certain organ that they usually love, it's not surprising that you might have some high inflammatory markers like cholesterol. You know?
Right. Because trying to put out those fires somewhere.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
Okay, so we talked about this, touched on this, but many allopathic doctors don't believe that mold contributes to major health issues. So, other than getting your home tested, what are some labs that you recommend for people? Say, their traditional doctor is like, no, that's not causing your health complaints. And so, if they want to just then, like you recommend being your own best doctor, what types of testings do you utilize and you recommend for people to have security to know that there still may be mold in their body?
Yeah, absolutely. So I really like an organic acids test. It's the best thing we have to kind of test mitochondrial function, even though it's a snapshot. It's not perfect. I also like it because it checks oxalate levels. And oxalates really are only dumped in made by candida and mold in the body. You may have some processing issues in the liver and things, but they're made by those two issues. And so it helps me look to see if oxalates are causing some pain or kidney infections, things like that for people. And then I also love the Vibrant Labs and Great Plains Lab urinary mycotox test. There is a blood test now that looks for antibodies too. That's pretty cool. But I really like to look at the urine mycotoxins coming out and match it to symptoms because even if people have high urinary mycotoxins on the test, if they don't have symptoms, it can mean they're getting rid of them properly, right? So
Hmm.
it's helpful for me to match all these tests, which are very nuanced, with symptoms as well.
Right. And you can still have symptoms, but your test can also show not that high as well. And so that can also be a problem.
Yeah, if your drainage is blocked, you can't poop, you can't sweat, you see undigested food in your stool, all those things, you might not be properly dumping out the spores to catch in the urine, right?
Hmm. Do you, with your clients, I don't even know if you're still seeing clients or you're just doing your Wellness Plus, but
Right.
yeah, okay, I thought so. Well, maybe before, did you recommend, like, even before doing a mold test on anyone you suspected, to first check, what are those markers? Because I know the markers, but for people, what are those markers that you always check before just rushing right into the test to make sure you get adequate testing?
Yeah, I honestly am not a huge tester. I'm probably a one hit wonder. So I'll really work with people. If they need blood work, I'll do that. Thyroid panel, iron panel,
Mhm.
CMP, whatever they need that way. But really, I don't. I try to not get a mycotoxin test until a couple months in, so I can work on their drainage. So I know the drainage is improving things regardless. And I also
Mhm.
know that way I'll get a more accurate mycotoxin test a couple months down the road when they're able to get rid of the mold spores properly for the test. So sometimes if they're not improving or I think my hunch is wrong, I'll get a test sooner to be
Mhm.
sure, but not always at all.
Yeah, and that's important because people go to some really great natural providers too, and they run all these tests initially, and then they also could not be getting the exact results as well. So always work on make sure you're hydrated, pooping, sweating, all the things that you recommend all of the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Super important.
Yes. Absolutely.
Um, Go for it.
No, I was just going to say you guys also need proper sleep and sunlight and diet and all that stuff. And then once that's all kind of cued in, then I have a better idea or springboard to jump from to see where we need a tailored improvement in protocol.
Right. Because it's, a lifestyle. We want to encourage that.
Correct.
So you're successful and not just killing things all the time, because that's never fun or super beneficial long term. So, what are some top recommendations that you have after being exposed to mold? Do you prefer binders? Do you prefer herbs? Like, what specifically do you
So yeah,
choose?
I actually feel like if I had one supplement everyone should take every day, it would probably be a binder because they're really,
Mhm.
really sticky and they pull things out that don't belong. Not all binders are created equal. I definitely wouldn't have someone on something like cholestyramine for the rest of their lives that actually help bind up nutrition sometimes. So something like a fulvic or humic acid binder that provides nutrition while not robbing people of their nutrition too is really important. I also think that really supporting energy production and mitochondria is really important for some of these people. So, in the acute treatment period, once they're out of the mold, I'll definitely help support their cellular energy. I definitely make sure that they are still pooping, which is probably one of the most important things people can do every day that they take for granted. If you're pooping and sweating almost every day, you're really going to probably feel better than most people do that are sedentary and don't move their body, aren't able to release things, which is what sweating and pooping do. They help you release toxins besides cooling you down, and other things. So I really think I don't have people on more than like four things at a time, to be honest with you. So it
Mhm.
depends on each person. A binder, something to help them go if they can't, something for cellular energy and support, and then oftentimes just minerals, right? So our food
Mhm.
is stripped today that sometimes just giving people the basic building blocks to help their body assimilate on its own is really important.
And typically, mold and other types of biotoxins strip your body of minerals too. And so there's that factor that even if you're getting enough, you may not have enough for the time being.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And I know you mentioned fulvic minerals. Are there different types of binders that work better for different types of mold? Because some people will just like, oh, I'm just taking charcoal or clay or, whatever it is. um, what do you recommend specifically for mold?
Right. That's a great question. So there's been a comparison of binders on the market done by Dr. Neil Nathan before. It was really, really helpful. I love activated charcoal. If you have a hangover, it works great, but it doesn't leave the gut, and mold does. So it's not going to get the really root source of the problem for most people. I love bentonite and zeolite clays. The problem is you really want to watch out for heavy metals and where they're sourced from. Um,
Mhm.
and then cholestyramine, I only works against ochre toxins, so I don't love that one. The clays, like zeolite and bentonite, actually have pretty good spectrum of molds they cover, right? And so that works pretty well. Saccharomyces boulardii is actually decent as well as a biofilm buster and to bind up mold. And then chlorella, okay, it works against aflatoxin. We're not really sure how well it does against other things. Diatomaceous earth works against aflatoxin and ochre toxin. And so, again, there's a lot of different other mold spores in there that we're not sure how well its activity is against them. So I really like the activated carbon binders, especially by microbe formulas or Cellcore. I haven't been able to
Mhm.
match them yet. They're able to really inactivate things with a carbon molecule while providing energy to the body in the form of like amino acids and polysaccharides. So the body really wants to react with their binders, use it and bind it and pull it out of the body.
Mhm. And those hidden places too, like the brain and all those areas you can't really get.
Yeah, it's hydrophobic and hydrophilic, so it's able to go across the blood-brain barrier, across the gut barrier to work systemically in the body. Okay.
Yeah, it's a powerhouse.
Yeah,
Superpower.
I agree. Yeah.
Other than binders and other things of that nature, do you recommend, because you mentioned very early in the podcast too, that mold can be in certain foods, and you say usually it's not like that big of a deal if people are doing well and their immune system is good, but are there typically like certain foods that you like overall just recommend people like decrease because they're just really high in mold consistently?
Yeah, absolutely. Coffee is a big one. I know this hurts people when I say it, but coffee is a big one. You can get mold-free coffee, so maybe, yeah, or even King Coffee or made by Organo is a great brand that uses reishi spores. So you guys can make like compromises or swaps like that. Chocolate, I hate to say it again, another one. Things like berries, blueberries, raspberries, strawberries. You guys probably seen the white fuzzy mold that grows on those sometimes. Corn, grains in general can get pretty moldy. So watch and make sure with that stuff too. And let's see, I think that's most of the big ones.
Nuts? Is nuts one too?
Nuts.
Yeah.
Yeah, nuts, depending on the person. There are some people I've noticed they're really sensitive with that, with mold disease, and other people who aren't. It's really interesting. It's like people are allergic and aren't almost. So yeah, I don't rely a whole bunch on food unless someone can't get out of their moldy place and we're having a hard time getting them better. So that then I really start to hone in on the food problem. you know,
Yeah. Or they're eating like peanut butter every single day.
right? Not good, probably.
Which
Not
is
good.
like a lot of people.
Aflatoxin.
So good. Yeah, there is that problem. And people love the things they're sensitive to.
Uh-huh.
It's like it's so wild, but they're eating things and they're reacting. They're like, but I'm craving that thing. And
I'm always like, are you craving? Is it you? Because I think it
yes,
could be a pathogen.
totally.
Yeah,
You're feeding it. It's loving it.
yeah, yeah.
Well, Dr. Jess, this has just been amazing. Thank you so much for coming on today. I truly appreciate you so much, and I'd love for you to mention your program that took blood, sweat, and tears to develop Wellness Plus, as it's been helping thousands of people's like topics we're talking about today for people to learn about more things about their body. So, would you like to plug your Wellness Plus for a moment?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. So Wellness Plus was created in December 2020, and we decided we wanted a censor-free ship platform where people could really talk about important issues and not have to worry about the fact-checking police. So that we created Wellness Plus, which is app.drjessmd.com is where you can find it. We have a new landing page which should explain everything to people, but there are professionally filmed courses, professionally filmed Wellness Plus talks, which are similar to a podcast episode. We have root cause quickies, which 4 different doctors are working on, including me. We have a community forum, which all 4 of us doctors answer you on. I personally answer almost everyone's question on there at least a few times a week. And we have a store. So we really vet and try to find green, organic, sustainable products that are safe for people to help them along their wellness journey. So that's Wellness Plus, and it really came out of my need to tell the truth to people and educate them on what the human body actually can do.
Yeah, it's so excellent. So many people just rave about it. And so, she's such an awesome educator. She's super fun. She makes things great and silly. But these are sometimes really hard topics. So you have to, be lighthearted sometimes
I'm not everyone's
around.
cup of tea, right? But hopefully some people enjoy the raspberry leaf tea or whatever I am. I try to make things silly for people in a very serious field. So
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have any other? I noticed you just released some new supplements that you were working on. Is there anything else in the um, driver's seat coming too, or is that kind of what you're going to settle with right now?
yeah, we launched those through Soul CBD, and it's a rendition of my old products. So Hormone Hero, Gut Hero, Thyroid Hero, and yes, we probably will be coming out with more in a partnership with them. We actually have a lot of my formulations already out, like Chill, Alert, Debloat. A lot of their other formulations came from me as well. So I think it's a beautiful partnership. We're all very happy. So I think we'll continue to produce things that help people. Yeah.
And what was the name of it? Soul CBD.
Yes. Soul CBD. It's owned by Angie and Mike Lee, who are brother sister team. Yeah.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll put all of those in the preview to so people can link to those things. But so excellent. Thank you again so much for your time. I hope you all enjoyed this episode and share it with many people. And we will catch you all on the next episode.
Bye.